So this week we're going to be in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to come to the parable of the new wine and the old wineskins. And really this is part of a rapid-fire parable session in the latter part of Mark chapter 2 that teach such a profound message. He's going to teach us, really give us this warning about looking back and holding on to the old and losing sight of the new. And it's something we all need to understand and really just kind of be reminded of occasionally. Now, before we read the parable, because again, this parable consists of one verse. And it's part of a rapid-fire multiplicity of two parables and an example of a wedding feast and all these things that are really the lesson. But you have to understand the context that sets the stage for the lesson. Why he said what he said. So in Mark chapter 2, instead of beginning down in verse 21, we're actually going to back up to verse 13. Mark 2, verse 13. There we read, "Then he went out again by the sea, and all the multitude came to him, and he taught them. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, 'Follow me.' So he arose and followed him. Now it happened, as he was dining in Levi's house, that many tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eating with tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, 'How is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners?' When Jesus heard, he said to them, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.' The disciples of John and the Pharisees were fasting. And they came and said to him, 'Why do the disciples of John and of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?' And Jesus said to them, 'Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. Then they will fast in those days.'" Then he gets to these parables. Verse 21, "No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskin, or else the new wines burst the wineskin, and the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins." That's what led to the teaching here that Jesus is about to give. Jesus has been in Capernaum, which is his home base, for the much of really his ministry. A little bit of time in Judea. He's going to spend over 2 years in Galilee. He's going to end up back in Judea, Perea, before he makes his entrance into Jerusalem. So he spends a lot of time in this area. And one of my favorite miracles has just happened, where the paralytic is lowered through the roof, and Jesus heals him, and then Jesus leaves, and he goes down by the Sea of Galilee. There, he's walking, and he sees a man named Levi. And you don't really know him as Levi as well as you know him as Matthew. Matthew is a tax collector. As a tax collector, Matthew is a despised person. He's a despised man because of his trade. In fact, the Jews would look at Matthew as a traitor to his own people. Because paying taxes is something we're familiar with, right? We all pay. If you live here, we all pay taxes. It doesn't mean you're happy about paying taxes. It just means it's what you do. At least we can see where some of the money goes. We can see where we may not agree with how it's spent, but at least we can see it. Imagine having to pay incredibly high taxes to an oppressing government to line the pockets of Caesar, where you didn't benefit from it at all in any way. Now imagine that as part of your life. That's how it was for them. In fact, something we hear tax collectors over and over again, but something interesting about these tax collectors. You see, we think it's a job. It's not a job. It's a bid position. You weren't just chosen as a tax collector. You bid on that position based on how much money you think you could bring in to Caesar. So Caesar had to get X amount to fulfill your duty as the tax collector, but if you wanted to make money, then you charged more than that. Whatever you charged over that went to line your pocket. And so Jesus finds this despised Matthew in a tax booth in Galilee. But let's add to the drama a little bit. You have Peter, Andrew, James, and John, who were fishermen in Galilee, who would have to pay taxes on the fish they caught, they had to pay taxes on all the materials they bought. Who do you think they were paying taxes to? Do you think when Jesus called Matthew, that's the first time they ever met Matthew? They're in the same area. They knew who Matthew was. So imagine how they felt when Jesus told Matthew, hey, come follow me. I almost guarantee you could just see Peter, the way Peter goes, whoa, don't you know who this guy is? We can't have him. But Matthew, amazingly, just gets up and leaves. Just like that. He didn't call it vacation. He left it behind. And I want you to understand this, and the faith of Matthew is incredible. I honestly wish more Christians today had Matthew's kind of faith. The fisherman, if this doesn't work out, let's say the whole Jesus thing doesn't work out, the fisherman can go back to fishing. Matthew can never go back to being attached to that. There was a big position that he walked away from, turning away from Rome. He couldn't go back to it. He completely gave up the old, left it there, and followed what he hoped was going to be the new. What he was looking at was the new. And you would think that's a choice that we would celebrate. I mean, that's great. Not if we're stuck in the past. So we don't have to wonder how the Pharisees thought about this. They're the emphasis of the lesson. It's all about them. And so you fast forward now, Jesus is at this dinner party at Matthew's house, and the Bible tells us there's a bunch of tax collectors, then to make it a little more clear, and sinners there. And this blows the Pharisees' minds. Can't have this. This is ridiculous. They can't stand the idea that Jesus would even associate with people like this. I mean, think about what all they've done. And what's Jesus' response to them? The masterful teacher. He says, the well don't need a physician. The sick are the ones that need the physician. And the bigger question we have to ask ourselves is, does that then mean Jesus is making the assumption that the Pharisees would be in the group of well people? They certainly think they're there. But did Jesus just make the same statement? Because in their minds, we know they thought they were perfectly fine. Think about what Jesus saw in Matthew, because again, that sets the stage for this. Jesus didn't see a past sinful life. He didn't see the greed, the selfishness, the desire for money. That was there. All those were there. He didn't see the old anymore at all. What Jesus saw in Matthew was potential. And I go as far as to tell you this, and I'm always careful with this, because the Bible doesn't tell us this specifically, but I don't believe for a second that Jesus was there by coincidence. I don't believe that for a second. I think he was there specifically for Matthew. But again, that's just my belief. Now let's think about Matthew's side of this for just a moment. Again, here's our word again. Choice. Always choice. Matthew's faced with the choice of choosing between the past he knew his whole life or a future that was unknown to him of how it could be. And he immediately gets up, leaves it all, and follows the Lord. But now Jesus wants the lesson to be clear here, and I'm emphasizing this point because this matters to you specifically. It wasn't about your old life that decides your value today. And a lot of times we think that. We think a lot of what we've done in the past is what dictates our value today. If that was the case, Matthew would have never been called. It's about what you do in the present that decides your future. And so many today live stuck in the past. Past sins, past choices. We wonder why nothing ever gets better. So here's where we come to our question. I ask a question every lesson that really is the emphasis of our lesson for the day. What are you doing with your life today? Seems like a pretty simple question. But are you one stuck in the past, remembering the old, or has your past helped shape your future? And so all of that leads to these rapid-fire parables in Mark chapter 2, where the Pharisees, and don't miss this is important, and the disciples of John are there to question Jesus. We just assume that all the disciples of John went to be Christians. They started following Jesus. That's not the case. In fact, they're here with the Pharisees, questioning Jesus, questioning the practices of Jesus, but they didn't do it to Jesus. See, they didn't want to go to him because Jesus would shut them down every time they started these conversations. You couldn't get that leg up on Jesus Christ. So they go to the disciples of Jesus and say, hey, why do you do this? Why does Jesus do this? Of course, Jesus hears it and Jesus chimes in and takes over the conversation. Now, a lot of what we talk about has to do with this comparison of old religion versus new religion. Judaism versus Christianity. That's the overarching theme of the lesson, but it's much more personal than just that. If you leave it there, you will have missed a big part of this. But now let's look at this in terms of religion first. One of the issues they come and they address is, these are the disciples of John, is fasting. Why are we fasting and you're not fasting? You're at a dinner party. Fasting is a requirement of the law, which was true. Now, if I were to ask you this question, because you read the New Testament, fasting is a big part of the New Testament. How many times in the Old Testament did it say you were required to fast? See, we read this in the New Testament, we think, well, it was all the time. No. One time per year, it was the required fasting period. The Day of Atonement, today you hear called Yom Kippur. That is the only day required in the Bible that was a required amount of fasting. All other fasts that you read about in the Bible were personal choices based on whatever your situation was. It's a time meant to deny yourself so you can focus on prayer, focus on giving yourself to God. Just lay it out there. It's a sorrowful time. But the Pharisees, being Pharisees, are going to go all Pharisaical on this. They say, that's not good enough. We're going to make it a law. So by the time you come to the New Testament, fasting is now a law, required to do at least twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. Law. That's why you see in the parable Jesus gives the Pharisee and publican, the Pharisee comes in and says, God, I thank you that I'm not like the sinner over here, this lowly tax collector. I fast twice per week. Because that's the law that they had made. That was their right, their choice, but they made it a law. The problem is they're hypocrites. Unfortunately, a lot of religion has to deal with hypocrisy. They're hypocrites. Because they fast twice a week. They do so very publicly. They disfigure themselves. They make themselves look dirty. They look miserable. Also, that someone would see them and see how spiritual they are. It's more about the action and the meaning behind the action. And folks, this is an area where Christians need to be careful today. When faith becomes about the action and less about the reason behind the action, the worship, the Lord's Supper especially, prayer, when it becomes about doing something and not remembering why we do it, we're in danger of being like the Pharisees. It's not about the action, but the reason behind the action. So that they're stuck on this idea of fasting. How come your disciples aren't fasting? They're in the presence of the Lord. Why aren't they fasting? So Jesus gives the first example of a wedding feast. He said to them, can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom, they can't fast. So I want you to listen to how ridiculous this got, how hypocritical religion has gotten with this. They actually had to make a rule, and you can look this up in rabbinical writings. They had to make a rule that says you can't fast at weddings. Do you know why they had to make that rule? Because they would come in there fasting at weddings. They would come in there to get all the attention on them, that they were coming in rags and trying to look dirty. And somebody would go, hey, you want a piece of wedding cake? I can't, I'm fasting. It was all about trying to get attention. And so they actually had to make a law that said you can't fast at a wedding. And so Jesus says that exact example. He said, listen, the time of fasting is coming. The time of sorrowful mourning, it's coming. We know it's coming. He says this is a time of celebration. One thing that absolutely irks my nerves more than just about anything else when it comes to anything church related is every time I see a Christian walking around with their head down, acting like they're defeated. We're in the wedding feast right now. We're in the presence of God right now. You know when we assemble, Jesus is here. He's here with us. We are in His presence. This is a time of celebration, of worship, of joy. We walk around with our heads down like we're just defeated. That time was coming. But here we are in the same boat. So what happens next, he kind of gives this illustration, but then he goes to these two parables. Each one verse, each just equally as powerful. I've been studying more and more on the wineskin, which is why I'm emphasizing that one. But powerful lesson. So first he goes to the parable of the cloth. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. It's almost ironic that this sounds so simple. It just sounds so easy to understand. I mean, patching clothes is a common thing. I've watched my grandmother do it a lot. I've watched Melissa have to fix stuff all the time. And so we're used to doing this. And in fact, if I asked most anybody in here, have you ever had to sew a patch on some form of clothing? Most everybody would say yes. In the first century, you didn't just drive down to Walmart. You certainly didn't take out your phone and go to your Amazon Prime account and order something to be here in 2 days. You couldn't do that. What you have is what you had. Something ripped, you fixed it. The problem is putting a new piece of cloth on an old piece of clothing. Now, you probably understand why. If you've done this, you understand why. As soon as that new piece of cloth is washed and dried, it's going to shrink, right? You buy a new shirt. It drives me crazy. I get a new shirt, try it on, it fits perfectly. I put it in the dryer. It comes out looking like it's made from masonry. You understand this? They shrink, right? New cloth, that's what it does. So you get the literal illustration that if you take an old piece of garment, you put a new piece of cloth on it, going to wash it and dry it, it's going to shrink, it's going to pull away from the cloth, it's going to make the rip bigger. Not complicated. Pretty simple. Most everybody would understand it. This is meant directly for the Pharisees. Jesus did not come to patchwork Judaism. He came to fulfill the law, replacing it with something better, which is why we're not under the Mosaic system today. What were these Pharisaical religious people wanting to do? Well, they want to keep to their traditions. They're hypocrites. They want to keep to their traditions. They want to keep to the things they do, unbeknownst to them the reason even behind why they're doing it. They have no interest in what Jesus is saying. They just want to do what they're used to always doing. That's what's important. And since they're so religious, they would never do what Jesus did. They would never be seen with wicked tax collectors. They're too righteous for that. That's exactly how it sounds, isn't it? So he kind of gives us this illustration. But then to bring this home, he goes to the parable that I can't tell you. I've been reading this over and over again. I've been studying this a lot here lately. The parable of the wineskins. And what's puzzled me so much about this parable is just how deep you can keep going in this. You keep thinking eventually you're going to get to the bottom of it. I've been going to this for weeks now. And I don't know where the bottom is of this thing. It's amazing. So he says, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins. Pretty simple, isn't it? Isn't it simple? You don't pour new wine into old wineskins. It's that simple. And for the majority listening, it went no further than that. It's that simple. But what's Jesus saying here? How deep is he going here? And so we look at the parable itself. Wine, of course, is a common drink for them. This is what they would drink more often than not because their water was garbage, full of bacteria. In fact, the more you drink the water, the more sick you're going to get. Now, before you get excited and think that's now justification that you can go home and get tore up on wine, their wine's not like our wine. Their wine, when they had fermented wine, yes, alcoholic wine, when they had fermented wine, was nothing like what we have today. A lot of times what we call wine was actually just the grape juice unfermented. Nothing like what we had today, especially in alcohol contents. In this parable, the emphasis here is on fermented wine. It is on fermented wine. So what would happen is this. You would take this grape juice and you would pour it into a wineskin. Maybe a gallon and a half. You'd pour it into the wineskin and you'd hang it up somewhere and you'd let it sit. And as it went through the fermentation process, the gases would come off the grapes, off the grape juice, and that leather pouch would expand and expand until it was done with the fermentation process. In the process, the leathers are going to be stretched and stretched, and they're going to stay stretched. They won't just go back. They're done. It's a one-and-done process. And when all that's said and done, then you would drink it. The problem comes when you put new wine into old wineskins. You think, well, why? You've already stretched the pouch. What do you think is going to happen if you take leather that's already been stretched and you put new wine in it that has to ferment, it has to grow and grow and grow, but the pouch has already grown as far as it can grow? What's going to happen? It's going to burst, right? I mean, that's what Jesus says. This is how simple this is. Like I've been going at this for weeks, and I don't know where the bottom is of this. So let's break it down just a little bit. We'd be here for hours if we really started diving deeper and deeper into this. The teaching of Jesus is the new wine, no doubt. Take any confusion out of that. The teaching of Jesus, the gospel, that's the new wine. Now, understand the exclusivity of this. This is how you can keep going down all these different paths of how deep this is. Lesson 1 in this is the exclusivity of it. It's Jesus. It's His gospel. The gospel does not meld with anything else. The gospel doesn't meld with Judaism. It doesn't meld with any. It is just the gospel. That's it. That's the comparison. It doesn't blend with the majority of what our country calls religion today. It doesn't blend with Judaism. It doesn't blend with Islam. It doesn't blend with anything. It's its own thing. And so people have taken the words of Jesus and they try to make it fit their own narrative, their own ideas of religion. Of course, today it's centered more about entertainment, more about making you feel better about your sinful life. It's the new wine and the new wine skin. It's this new approach to this. They want the new wine, but what they think they want in the new wineskin is the old skins. Now, we can understand the meaning of this quite easily for the Pharisees. Again, this is a multiplicity of lessons in this parable. We look at this from the aspect of the Pharisees specifically. Judaism was being replaced. Judaism was being fulfilled. It was replaced with the gospel. It didn't mend, it didn't blend, it was replaced. But if we're not careful, we will miss how relative this is for us. It doesn't stop with that. Again, it's just so deep, it's amazing. But I want you to remember this and why I really say what I do. And why we backed up and we read an additional 7 verses before we got to the parables. What's this in the backdrop of? What led to this? See, in the central theme of this is around Matthew. It's around a tax collector, a former sinner. He's the one that really led to this. And Jesus called him. He gets up. He leaves. He doesn't ask for vacation. He gets up and he leaves. He just follows him. Now, Matthew's one that could have made every effort possible to blend the gospel into something that would have worked, to blend the gospel into something that he could have kept doing his job. He could have made every avenue possible except for the fact that he couldn't return to it. And see, I'm always afraid of this. And I'll be honest with you, every time I baptize someone, I'm always worried about this. I'm always afraid of how many people try to play this game where I'm going to give my life to Christ, but I want new wine and old wineskins. I want the idea of the new. I like the idea of the new, but I want to blend it with the old. I want to keep the old too. I want to be a Christian, but I want to hang on to my old life. And I'm always worried about that. Oh yeah, I'll be at church on Sunday, but I'm going to go get hammered on Saturday. I'll try my best to be there. I'm a Christian, but I'm perfectly fine with sexual immorality. I'm a Christian, but I'm a practicing homosexual. And I feel like God is a God of love, and that's going to be okay. Or I'm a Christian, but I can only worship God every so often. I mean, let's be honest, life is busy. I mean, did you see how late the game went last night? New wine, old wineskins. Jesus says they don't work together. And that's not what Jesus had in mind when he gave us the new wine. What does he want from us today? Because again, we'll be here for a long time and start going down all the avenues of the lesson of this parable. What does he want from us today? He wants us to be like the apostles. He wants us to be like Matthew because we're just as sinful as Matthew. He wants us to walk away from everything else and put him first. Me and Jason were talking about this the other day. And there's some weird things you read in the Bible that kind of catch your attention. Where you read where Jesus says, if you don't hate your father and mother, you're not worthy of me. We think, that's crazy. Who says stuff like that? If you're out for numbers, this is nonsense to say. The whole emphasis that Jesus puts on his entirety of teaching is the exclusivity of it all. If you're going to follow him, he has to be first. He has to be the prominent figure in your heart. It doesn't literally mean you hate your father and mother. It means if you thought about it in the grand scale of your love, you love God so much, it could be perceived that you hate your father and mother. That's how much you love God. Of course you don't hate your father and mother. That's not what he's really saying. But it's how much you love God. How much you put the Lord first. And that's my hope for all of us today. That we do that. So I want you to understand how important this short one-verse parable is in a time today where so many are trying to change the word. So many are trying to change and blend and meld this word. The gospel is exclusive. The gospel doesn't meld with anything. It's not outdated. It doesn't need to be updated. It is the breath of God meant for us to follow, and that's it. See, too many churches today and too many Christians today are guilty of trying to put new wine in old wineskins. We're trying to appease the masses. We're trying to fit in with a sinful world instead of being the church that Jesus built. And so I don't want you to fall in the trap of doing that. Don't be a Pharisee saying, I fast twice a week. Well, that just means you're a hypocrite. That's all. Which of these describe you more today? See, Matthew understood something. Matthew understood who he was and where he wanted to go. He didn't want to look back, he wanted to look forward. I think about those examples I know. Think about someone you know. You know somebody like this. I'm sitting here, my mind running through several. I know people that have done this. I know people doing this right now. And they wonder why nothing ever changes in their life. Why it's only ever the same thing over and over again. Because they keep trying to put new wine in old wineskins. See, remembering our past is not the problem. We all remember different things in our life. We remember what's brought us to where we are. Hopefully, my hope is that you remember your sinful existence that brought you out of it, and how the grace of God, the blood of Jesus, brought you out of that and made you new and gave you this new life that you're in now. And that's the catalyst going forward. I hope that's what you remember so that you can look forward and you can see the hope of your life. But the reality is that's not the case for everybody. And somebody here today may need help. They may need prayers. They may need encouragement. Maybe somebody needs to answer the gospel call because you realize you've been stuck in the past. Remembering the past is not a bad thing. Living in the past is. Jesus brought hope, life, courage, peace, grace, everything, but he took the cross for us. So if there's anything that we can do to help you this afternoon, if you need the prayers of the congregation, if you need that encouragement, if you need to study further, whatever we can do to help you, Brother Dupree's about to lead us in this invitation song. And however we can help you, I'd encourage you to come as the rest of us stand as we sing.
There's a great day coming, a great day coming, there's a great day coming by and by, where the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? There's a bright day coming, a bright day coming. There's a bright day coming by and by. But its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming. There's a sad day coming by and by. When the sinner shall hear his doom depart, I know you not. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready? The judgment day. Justin, thank you so much for that good lesson. Don't think I've ever heard it exactly like that, but it's very good, very prominent today. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Hope you have a good week, Cottondale. We'll see you back here Wednesday. We've got a busy week. Ladies Thursday night and potato giveaway Saturday and gospel meeting next week. Let's start praying for that gospel meeting. Justin and Melissa's done a lot to help us prepare for it. Let's do our part. I know Brother John will be able to do his part when he gets here. So we're going to have our fellowship meeting on that Sunday. We're going to have our breakfast that Saturday morning. Hopefully John will be able to come. If not, they'll just need more breakfast for us if he don't make it here. Ain't that right, kid? Okay, 592. If you have not had the opportunity to take the Lord's Supper, I know we've got one, maybe two that have not. So Brother Glenn, if you would attend to that for me, and we'll be led in our closing prayer. 592. 592. Let me turn there. Hope you have a good week. You Tennessee fans, y'all enjoy this week. I should not have mentioned that during worship service. Nevertheless, okay. This is take the name of Jesus with you. We've got some important information that everybody in this old sin-sick world needs, people. Let's take it to us. Sing the first and second verse of this song, and then we'll be led in our closing prayer. As we sing, if you have not had the opportunity to take the Lord's Supper, be prepared, still prepared to move to my left. Let's sing. Take the name of Jesus with you, child of sorrow and of woe. It will joy and comfort give you. Take it, and where you go, precious name, oh how sweet, hope of earth and joy of heaven, precious name, oh how sweet, hope of earth and joy of heaven. Take the name of Jesus ever as a shield from every snare. If temptation round you gather, breathe that holy name in prayer. Precious name, oh how sweet, hope of earth and joy of heaven. Precious name, oh how sweet, hope of earth and joy of heaven. Brother Paul.
Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the opportunity we've been here this worship service to worship you, the one and only living God. We pray that everything that's been said and done has been pleasing in your sight. As we live our life this coming week, help us to only do good and no harm to anyone. Forgive us of our many sins. Keep us safe until we come back together.